Welcome to the Freedom Camp Podcast, rooted in truth, growing in freedom, and built on the belief that you weren't meant to grow alone. Each week, I'll share honest stories, insights, and simple questions to help you explore the unseen things that keep you from living in the freedom that's already yours, and take brave, intentional steps toward the life you were made for. This is your space to reconnect with your authentic self and grow in freedom on purpose.
This Christmas season, I keep coming back to Mary. Not the polished, stained glass church version of her, but the real woman, or teenager even, who was interrupted in ordinary life, given a word that didn't quite make sense yet, and called favored before it felt believable. Let it be to me as you have said, ended up being her response. But that wasn't her first response. I keep thinking about how favor didn't feel real in that moment for her, and it often doesn't feel real for us either. How confused she was, how unsure she must have been, and how little of what was coming made sense to her. And honestly, that feels very familiar right now. I know many of us are sick, worn down, tired, and carrying more than usual. Some of you are navigating Christmases that don't look like the movies. Some of you are simply doing the brave work of showing up in bodies and seasons that feel fragile. And in moments like that, God's words about us can feel distant, even when we want to believe them. One thing I want you to know is this. So much of what we explore together in Freedom Camp and in the Freedom Camp podcast comes directly from my own life, from what I'm wrestling with, questioning, learning, and growing into right alongside you. This work is never theoretical for me. When we talk about identity, surrender, peace, boundaries, trust, and freedom, it's because those are the very places that God is meeting me in as well. And maybe that's part of the invitation for you this Christmas. Not to feel strong, not to feel joy on demand, and not even to force meaning, but simply to whisper in whatever way you can, let it be. Let it be messy. Let it be quiet. Let it be unfinished. Let it be honest. And let God meet you right there, right here. Not because you've earned it, but because you are already seen, already held, and already loved. Today on the Freedom Camp podcast, we're talking about what happens when God says one thing about you, but your lived experience says something else. And we're using Jesus's mother, Mary. Again, not the stained glass version, but the teenage girl receiving identity that she didn't feel ready for as our guide. Because most of us don't reject God's identity, we just don't recognize ourselves in it yet. And if your life right now feels ordinary, messy, stressful, or not enough, that makes you the perfect person for this conversation. I think one of the greatest struggles for women of faith is this. Our experience feels more real than what God says about us. We know the verses, we hear the promises, but inside we feel unqualified, unseen, behind, or not measuring up. So when Scripture uses a word like favored, most of us quietly assume it must be talking about someone else, or we need to get to a different place before it can be for us. And that's why I relate so much to Mary's first response being confusion rather than joy. It gives us permission to be honest about how foreign God's identity can feel for us too. There's a lot to learn about freedom and how we grow in freedom from Mary's story in Luke chapter 1, verses 28 through 36. There's a few identity moments that happen during these verses. And the first one that I want to point out is it starts out with a greeting from Gabriel. And he says, "Greetings, you who are highly favored." And Mary's response is not joy. It's troubled, confused, ruminating, even suspicious. And if that's you, welcome to the club. And we are here to grow in freedom, to receive more of God's identity and less of what our experience has taught us. The identity moment number 2 is Gabriel giving her this calling that she cannot fulfill on her own. And I think of how often God-sized assignments expose our limitations. And it's not to shame us or to belittle us. It's to anchor us back to Him. If what God is inviting you into feels beyond you, that's how it should feel. If you could do it yourself, you wouldn't need God. There'd be no stretching, no growth, no faith, no freedom. The third moment is Mary's first response. Well, how can this be? And remembering that honest questions don't disqualify you, that God meets our questions with reassurance and not with rebuke. The fourth moment is being reminded that nothing is impossible with God. Gabriel answers her by reminding her that her identity is confirmed by God's power, not her ability. And by God reminding us of all the times that He's done it before, either in your own life or in someone else's life. The look at the what I have done, and Gabriel brings up Elizabeth being old and 6 months pregnant. And I'm curious, what is an Elizabeth moment for you? Maybe a miracle that's happened in your life or something that you've seen in someone else's life. I'd love it if you would share it in the comments below and encourage and remind others who are also listening or watching this podcast about all of the times that God has been faithful, that God has shown up, that God has done the impossible, because for Him, it's not impossible. The fifth moment is when Mary then says, "Let it be as you have said." It's not a passive, it's not sarcasm, it's not apathy. It's an active agreement. It's alignment and it's cooperation with God. And the key here is that freedom starts where identity is received, not achieved. There's identity, there's surrender, and then there's fruitfulness. And in round 1 in Freedom Camp, which is starting on January 5th, we are focusing the entire round on identity for this exact reason. Because before Mary did anything, before she in any way earned her identity, which you don't do anyway, God declared it to her. That she was favored, she was chosen, she was seen, and she was assigned. Do you believe what God says about you more than what life has taught you? This is where freedom begins. And by that, I don't mean you have to get to that point before freedom begins. What I mean is the process of believing what God says about you more than what life has taught you is where freedom begins. So let's talk about where this breakdown happens in our real, ordinary lives. Because for many women, favored doesn't feel real because your story maybe has been hard for a long time. Maybe you feel chronically behind or overwhelmed. Maybe your picture of favor has been shaped by comparison, and your version doesn't match where or what you think it should. And because our nervous systems trust old disappointments more than new identity. Mary's story shows us that favor is not the absence of difficulty, but rather favor is God's presence inside of it. And at the moment that she said, "Let it be," nothing external had changed. The shift was internal first. So, where in your life does favored feel least believable now? I'd also love it if you would share that in the comments. You might be surprised an area that favor may feel least believable right now could be an area that someone else has already received favor in. For example, I know many women have received encouragement from me sharing my story of having Benjamin a couple weeks before I was 44 years old. And many women thought that they were too old, that it wasn't going to happen for them. And then I share that story of God allowing it to happen for me when it wasn't supposed to happen for me either. And that ends up being an encouragement for them. So, as we usually do, I also wanted to take just a moment and bring this into a personal place for you to really apply this to your own life. So, we're going to practice a "let it be to me." And I'm going to invite you to take the step now, which I'll guide you through. I'm going to share some ideas or some areas where feeling favored may feel least true or not real. And these don't have to, none of these may apply to you. All of them may apply. I hope not. The point is to kind of give you an idea to help charge your thinking and your life. So here they are. These are areas that maybe feeling favored doesn't feel true. Parenting, finances, marriage or lack thereof, your health, your calling, your confidence, your purpose, and your identity. And then I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. What does my experience say here? What does God say about me here? And then what is one step of alignment with God that I can take today? Some examples of alignment could be things like writing down an identity phrase, like "I am chosen, I am seen, I have the mind of Christ." Maybe it's setting a boundary that protects your peace. Maybe it's releasing one expectation. Maybe it's choosing to believe God's word before your feelings catch up. Once you have your answers, then you can say, "Let it be to me according to your word." Fill in the area starting today. And even if you need to say it 100 times a day, and you might at first, keep saying it. Keep surrendering. Keep intentionally surrendering. This is my encouragement to what God says about you rather than what your experience has taught you about you. If this conversation has stirred something in you, that is great. This is exactly what we do inside of Freedom Camp. It's not just a surface level encouragement, but it's a deep foundational identity, growth, and fruitfulness that's ongoing and is based off of what God is doing in my life with a framework. We do body, mind, soul, and spirit. First round, we're doing deep identity work, like awakening. Second round, we are looking at being rooted. And then the last round, we're really looking at bearing fruit and what that ends up looking like. So the doors are open now through January 4th. We only open them 3 times a year because this community grows through trust and depth and a shared journey. If you would like to be part of the next round or learn more about it, head over to the website, hop on the wait list. And until next time, may what God says about you become more real than what life has tried to teach you. And thanks again for listening to the Freedom Camp podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Freedom Camp podcast, where we believe freedom is nurtured from within and grows when you tend to it. If this stirred something in you, let it take root this week and see what grows. And if you enjoyed this or found it meaningful, please give the gift of a review, share it with a friend, and leave a comment below. It helps us build this podcast community because we weren't meant to grow alone.